that feels to me a defensible position to take. I understand why people might want to take a different point of view.
Acknowledging, Mr. Sunak, that rationale, in looking for sort of criteria or levers that enable support to be best targeted, I think, as you've just said, targeting support to those who need it most. Do you think, on reflection, that a minimum wage threshold would actually just be quite an effective way at targeting those who are known to be particularly vulnerable economically? So less focus on whether it's defensible, but whether perhaps it's optimum in terms of targeting and getting money where it's needed.
I think if you look at the round of all the different interventions that we did, I mean, CGRS was there to ensure people were connected to their place of employment, did not lose their job, and obviously did not suffer a disastrous drop in their income. And that's obviously, we took the generous end at 80%, by the way. If you look at the range of international comparisons, we were, the range was probably 70 to, I forget, it's in my evidence, 70 to 90 or something, 70 to 85.
I think to 100% is in your statement.
I mean, there are other models where people have had more permanent versions of this, which are different. But in general, what was stood up during the pandemic in most large countries, I think 80% compares pretty favourably and is on the generous end. So I think we're starting with that point. We did other things in universal credit, hardship funds, local housing allowance, as we've discussed. There's so many different interventions. If you look at the outcomes on the most vulnerable people, I don't need to go through them again. I think in absolute terms, we did a good job there. And things like the flat rate in universal credit, again, disproportionately benefits, for example, single young people who were the most impacted by the various MPIs. So again, I think in the round the support was well targeted. I think on the 80% and the national living wage interaction, I think the position we took was defensible.
Thank you, Mr. Sunak.
Perfect. And just I said it earlier, but I thought the relationship and the constructive working between, Kate and Francis, or Baroness O'Grady at the TUC during this period was something that I thought was incredibly valuable. I know unusual for them to spend so much time with a Conservative Chancellor at the time, but I think it made a huge difference to have a good constructive working relationship, and I'm grateful to them for that.
I think that's a shared reflection, Mr. Sunak, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Ms. Hannett. Ms. Hannett's just there, Mr. Sunak.
Thank you, my lady. Mr. Sunak, I appear on behalf of the long COVID groups. You referred in your evidence yesterday to the importance of consulting with stakeholders such as the TUC and the CBI. The Treasury did not meet with the long COVID groups or participate in the Department for Health and Social Care ministerial roundtables, where the long COVID groups shared experience of its members, including in relation to employment issues. Should the Treasury have done more to meet with the long COVID groups to understand their concerns and the economic impact of long COVID?
Well, first of all, my sympathies to all those who are suffering with long COVID, because having spoken to some, I know it can be incredibly debilitating for people who are grappling with it. I'm obviously not aware of every single interaction that the Treasury would have had with everybody, or indeed, as we've discussed, the engagement that bodies have with their relevant departments that they normally speak to that then gets fed into the Treasury, and I really wouldn't underestimate that. That happens a lot, in the sense that the advice I would receive throughout the pandemic would contain various views of different stakeholders that would have been fed through different departments, as well as people engaging directly with the Treasury. I think we've had a long discussion about the balance of engagement and speed at particular times. I think the thing I would want to make sure is, are there policies that we've got in place that are appropriate to help people? And by and large, think that we do. And I think that applies to those who are suffering with long COVID, as well as those who are suffering with other health conditions as a result of the pandemic, and just more generally.
Mr. Stewart, by way of follow-up, the members of the long COVID group would say that the existing policies actually didn't meet their needs or suit their needs, and that position wasn't taken on board by the Treasury. In hindsight and on reflection, do you accept it would have been preferable for your officials to meet with the members of my groups?
I'm sure, and the easiest thing for me to say is, of course, yes. Right? It costs me absolutely nothing for me to say yes. They should have met with you, and there will probably be, in all honesty, and we can just in the spirit of reflection, lots of groups that feel that they should have had an opportunity to talk to the Treasury. And the easiest thing for me to say is yes, they should have all done so. What I would say is, that there was no desire not to speak to particular people. That the general culture was one of engagement and learning and trying to understand the impact of what was happening on all people from all walks of life across the country, and then do the best job we could to put policy in place to support them. So I'm sorry if you felt that you did not get the engagement that you wanted and needed, and that's all I can say. And but I do believe that in general, the support that we put in place, did help people in all sorts of different ways, and particularly with people suffering from health conditions. The extra support that we put into the NHS and the social care system, and you'll be familiar with continuing health care, and the other support that we've put in place. For those who are suffering with long COVID, they will benefit from the extra resources that have gone in. We had the discussion with Mr. Wright on the economic inactivity point, because I think there was a thought that maybe it was a very significant driver of economic inactivity. It turns out, at least on the evidence that we have, that it has not been, which is a welcome development, I believe. And I'm sure you're engaging with the current government where you think that there is ongoing policy that needs to be adjusted, in the same way that I'm sure there are different groups with different conditions, whether mental or physical health, illnesses or disabilities, that want to make sure that their voice is heard. Of course it should be heard, and I hope you're engaging with the new government as well about what's required.
Thank you. Ms Beattie. Ms Beattie sits just in front of Ms Hannett.
Mr Sunak, I ask questions on behalf of national disabled people's organisations. On the 5th of November 2020, the Treasury and the Department for Work and Pensions were specifically commissioned by the Cabinet Office to consider and put forward a package of financial support to address the disproportionate impacts on disabled people, including but not limited to those on legacy benefits not covered by universal credit. And just, Mr Sunak, to remind you of the context, the Prime Minister and CDL had asked for a more ambitious package for disabled people, and the Cabinet Office had specified that recommendations and proposals needed to meet the scale of this ambition. Yet the COVID-0 meeting of the 8th of December 2020, which considered the product of that Cabinet Office commission, did not consider or agree any package of financial support for disabled people, whether on legacy benefits or otherwise. And the actions and decisions contained nothing about this. Why did the Treasury not put forward an ambitious package or even any package of financial support specifically focused on disabled people, not limited to those on legacy benefits, but including those, despite being specifically commissioned to do so by the Cabinet Office in view of the known disproportionate financial impacts on disabled people?
I'm sorry, but I can't speak to the specific meeting that you referenced, because I don't have a firm recollection of it, or whether I attended, or indeed the specific commission. Just as a general observation, the Treasury is commissioned for things all the time. Having sat both in the Treasury and in Number 10, that happens all the time, that the Cabinet Office or the Prime Minister's office will commission things, want ideas on things, advice on things. So just because something has been commissioned does not mean that it will get actioned. It's probably a very small proportion of things that get commissioned get actioned, and government is constantly looking at things. So again, I can't speak to that particular commission or why it wasn't taken forward.
Well, Mr Sunak, I mean, we know this was the government's attempt to look at the disproportionate impact on disabled people. The Treasury and all other departments were asked to consider this. And we also know from your statement that at the very time you decided to extend furlough at that time in late 2020, because you anticipated, you tell us in your statement, that people and businesses would need reassurance in relation to employment over the winter, that what was likely to be a second lockdown was coming. But this was a specific request for a package of financial support for disabled people to deal with the specific discriminate secondary impacts of NPIs on disabled people who might not be in employment, who might not be furloughed, but were in greater jeopardy through debt, lack of savings, food scarcity, among other matters. Do you not remember anything being done or considered in that respect?
Again, it would be wrong for me to talk to the specific commission because I don't have a recollection of it in the context of everything that was happening at the time. But and if it was commissioned by the Cabinet Office and Number 10, it's probably more appropriate for them to answer as to why they didn't take it forward, because I said I can't recall it. But to your more general point, as we've discussed over the last day and a half, there was enormous consideration given to vulnerable groups in our society and ensuring that the various different things that we did could help people in that position, not just through universal credit, but through all the various other investments and support schemes that were put in place. And you mentioned, food security or food insecurity. I mean, the data we have from DWP's household survey that they do every year shows that food insecurity fell for those households below average income. Food insecurity fell during the year of the pandemic compared to the year before, which I think is indicative of the support that we put in place helping vulnerable families and, again, tackling one of the specific things that you just raised about people's food insecurity.
Right, so that was a household survey. Was that disaggregated in respect of disabled people? You've already relied on the inquiry's labour market expert, Dr Brewer, but accepted that aggregate figures can mask specific inequalities. And Dr Brewer, in fact, goes on to say that there may be hidden inequalities, hidden household financial circumstances, and that was the case for disabled people. So generalised aggregate analysis doesn't tell you the full picture.
No, of course it doesn't. And that's why we provided billions of pounds of funding to local authorities to help exactly the people that you described. Because, of course, I'd accept that aggregate data, aggregate schemes are not going to capture every single person who is deserving and in need of help. It would be wrong to assume otherwise, which is why from the very first announcement I made at the budget through to the end of the pandemic, there was always a significant pot of money provided to local authorities for them to support the most vulnerable families in their communities that they would have best knowledge of and knowing who they were, to pick up exactly, as you said, those hidden people or hidden families that needed help. I'm very aware of that and made sure that there was funding made available to help exactly those people.
I think you're off-piste, Ms Beattie.
My lady, shall I turn to the second matter? Mr Sunak, you tell us in your statement that the Treasury submission of the 20th of March 2020 relating to the initial design of furlough considered potential equalities impacts of this measure, and there's a further submission of the 24th of March about further policy decisions on that, but neither of those submissions mention disability or disabled people. You further tell us that Treasury regularly conducted and published assessments on the impact of policies, for example, on household incomes. But again, none of the examples you cite refer to disability or disabled people. And of the equality assessments and analyses which have been seen and disclosed to date, analysis of impact on disabled people is sparse. Do you agree that the Treasury's assessment of the impact of policies was largely focused on household incomes and the poorest working households and did not extend to the specific impact on disabled people, which may be indeed, as it was, more specific than the aggregate analysis you've already accepted doesn't get down to that important detail?
No, I think on this point, I'm not sure I entirely agree. I mean, we have a statutory framework for this, so the public sector equality duty, which is obviously in statute through the Equality Act, requires decision makers, i.e. ministers, to show due regard to the potential effects of policy, service or decision on those who share one or more protected characteristics under the Equality Act. And my recollection is that that was always followed. I mean, the Treasury, like all departments, has a set of tools and a toolkit that it uses to do those assessments as part of ministerial advice. They were provided to me in submissions. I had no reason to think or believe that they weren't accurate or complied with the statutory obligation. Other departments would have done the same thing. So I think there was, in general, due regard in our obligations under the Equality Act, which is the legal provision we have to do exactly what you're describing, worked in that sense.
So, Mr. Sunak, that's the Act provision and the obligation. But in terms of the tools, none of the tools that we've seen contained substantive information or detail on the position of disabled people or their economic financial position. So do you agree that those tools were actually incomplete, in many cases out of date, and in fact inadequate for the purposes of conducting a meaningful analysis of the measures you are putting in place or choosing not to put in place as the Treasury?
I said I'm not. Look, I obviously don't have a in detailed recollection or understanding of the underpinning of all the individual tools that go into that assessment, and I'm sure it's something that could be suggested to the new government if you think the tools that are being used aren't appropriate or effectively accurate. But obviously I was just responding to the advice that I was given based on a set of toolkits that have been developed and by all accounts seem to be in compliance with the legislation that we have. So obviously that, I imagine as a matter of law and statute, that is a reasonable position to take. But if you have suggestions for the future, I'm sure people will be open to hearing them.
Thank you, Ms. Beattie. That does complete our questions for you, Mr. Sunak. You've obviously put a lot of time and effort into cooperating with the inquiry, and I'm extremely grateful for your help, and to those of your former colleagues who I suspect might have given a little bit of help in making your over 300-page witness statement ready for us. So thank you very much for your help. You've mentioned more than once the hard work and commitment of a number of your colleagues. The more I hear in this inquiry, the more evidence I hear, the more I become acutely conscious of the thousands of unsung heroes across the United Kingdom. And I know that people worked long hours under extraordinary pressure to save lives, save livelihoods, and keep the UK going. So I echo the praise, and I'm sure whatever findings I make, I'm sure that you too deserve what I think we deserve to all our unsung heroes, which is a huge debt of gratitude. So thank you very much indeed. And I won't ask you what your wife thought when you told her you would become Chancellor of the Exchequer just as COVID was hitting the United Kingdom. So much for your political dreams. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. I'm really grateful to you. I shall return at 10 to 2. All rise. That's great.
My lady, the next witness, please, is Robert Joyce.
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly,
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Take a seat.
Hope we haven't kept you waiting too long, Mr. Joyce.
Mr. Joyce, you have provided an expert report to the inquiry, and I'll give the reference INQ 0005888131. And just by way of introduction to you professionally, you're an economist with an expertise in the microeconomics of public policy and a particular specialism in labour markets, welfare, tax policy and economic inequality. Is that right?
That's right.
And you're a director at Alma Economics.
That's right.
You're instructed by the inquiry to prepare a report examining the key economic issues facing the United Kingdom during the Covid-19 pandemic, and in particular to explore the challenges and trade-offs that the economic policy response faced. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, we'll come on to this a little more in the substantive questions, but you were not asked and have not provided a comprehensive overview and assessment of all elements of the economic response, nor an evaluation, if you like, in terms of how you rate the response. Is that right?
That's correct.
So can we, first of all, as a topic, just look at the nature of the shock that was caused by Covid-19? And we've heard lots of evidence in the inquiry that it was unprecedented, and I think everyone agrees about that. But what was different about this shock in terms of the issues that it raised and how it materialised?
The main distinctive features are, first of all, that it affected so many different domains of life, and in particular of economic life, at the same time.